Minecraft Parkour is filled with jumps of varying difficulty. If you've played a lot of Minecraft Parkour, you can probably often tell if a jump is impossible just by looking at it. That 5-block jump? Yeah, that's impossible. However, it isn't always so obvious. Take a look at this jump. It looks easy, right? It's just a 2-block jump raised by a slab, and it's called a 2.5-block jump. However, if you try to perform it, you will fail 100% of the time. You can try different strategies such as using more momentum or coming in from the side, but none of these work. What looks like such an innocent, easy jump actually turns out to be impossible. Before we get into everything, I would just like to humbly ask that if you enjoy this video and content like this, please consider subscribing. If you feel you've made a bad decision, you can always unsubscribe later. Thanks, folks. So why is this jump impossible? If you've ever played Minecraft Parkour, you should know this jump, a 3+1. It's quite easy, yet this jump is a further distance and a larger height than the 2.5 shown before. So if this jump is doable, why isn't the 2.5? Well, there is one key feature that the 2.5 has. There's another block placed 2 blocks above the landing, making it sort of a head hitter landing. But this shouldn't matter, right? A player can easily fit into a 2-block ceiling, and there are plenty of other jumps with a head hitter landing that are easily possible. Here's a 3-block jump with a head hitter landing being done with no problems at all. In fact, we can even add a carpet to the bottom block, making it an even tighter squeeze, and the jump is still easily possible. So what could be making the 2.5 impossible? The distance and height aren't a problem. You can even watch someone attempt this jump and see they clearly have enough height to potentially make it. However, they can't seem to fit into the 2-block ceiling. Fitting into the 2-block ceiling was done earlier, so what's different now? The answer is actually kind of complicated, but it has to do with something called tiers. See, while Minecraft appears to be a smooth experience, it actually isn't. The game's fundamental physics are all based on one thing, known as the tick system. There are 20 ticks per second, meaning that one tick is 50 milliseconds. The game is not continuously updated, but rather at the end of each tick it is. One jump takes 13 ticks from the time a player jumps to the time they land again. Since the game is updated only at the end of each tick, this means there are 12 different positions on the y-axis that the player can be at over the duration of a jump. The different positions a player can be at while in the air make up tiers. So in other words, the player doesn't smoothly fall through the Minecraft world going through a seemingly infinite number of y values, but actually has quite a small and very much finite number of positions they will be at over the course of one jump. In a way, they almost teleport between y values, since they just go directly from one to the next, skipping all the values in between. So when a player jumps, their y value and therefore vertical positioning changes only 12 times before landing. Technically, there's actually only 11 different values a player will be at over the course of a jump, but this is because the player remains at the peak height for 2 ticks. Ignoring this exception, each tick that passes means the player is at a new y value. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, Minecraft looks smooth much more so than 20 updates per second, or what would be equivalent to 20 frames per second. This is what 20 frames per second looks like, and most of, if not all of you, would probably say that Minecraft looks a lot smoother than this when playing. Well, the truth is that Minecraft is faking it. While it appears on the user's screen that the player is smoothly falling, this is actually just an illusion. If we look at the player's actual y value, we can see that it changes less frequently than what the screen shows. As you can see here, visually the player appears to be falling. However, when comparing these two frames, even though it looks like the player has fallen slightly, the y value hasn't changed. This means that the player's actual position in the game hasn't moved. The player doesn't actually move at 60 frames per second or whatever frame rate you play at, but instead moves once per tick, giving us the tiers I mentioned. Now returning back to the original question of why this 2.5 block jump is impossible, if you pause the video and think really hard, you might be able to come up with somewhat of an idea, but allow me to spell it out. First, I'm going to slightly change the jump, just to make it easier to explain. Instead of starting on the slab, we will start on a block and jump to a slab, and make it the same head hitter landing by placing another slab. This jump is exactly the same, everything is just moved down by half a block. So in starting on a block, these are the y values we have. Over the course of a jump, the player will be positioned at each of these y values. In order to fit into the 2-block ceiling, we need to be in a position of anywhere from 0.5 to 0.7 blocks above the block that was jumped off of. How did I get these values? At a y value of 0.5 blocks above, the player is standing on the slab, and at 0.7 blocks above, the player will be hitting their head on the ceiling. So if the player is at any y value in between these, they will be able to make it into the space. However, by looking at the list of y values, we can see there is no height in between 0.5 and 0.7. This means that the player will never actually be positioned in between 0.5 and 0.7, so there is no point in time in which the player can make it into the gap. Now let's take a look at this with a real attempt. When slowing down the footage of the actual jump, we can see that the player's Y value skips from 0.7850 all the way down to 0.4807. They are never positioned in between these, and this again means the player is not able to fit. As you can see, the player simply slides down as if it was a solid wall. Even though they have enough height and are above the block they're trying to land on, they just can't fit into the gap. Now if we look back at the original jump where the player starts from the slab, the exact same thing happens. The only difference is that the actual height values are offset because we started from a slab, which is 0.5 blocks high, not a whole number. No matter where a player jumps from, the tiers will remain exactly the same. Tiers themselves are only defined as tier 1, tier 2, etc. The actual Y values that correspond to the tiers are what change. If we compare a regular 3-block jump to a 3-block jump on slabs, they are fundamentally the same jump, and both would be considered a tier 0 jump. However, the actual Y values of the player are different. So now applying this reasoning to the 2.5 block jump, since we started from a slab, we have to add 0.5 to all the original values listed on this page. These new ones are the Y values that the player will actually be positioned at over the duration of this jump. Again, if we look at actual footage of this jump, we can see the Y value skipping right over the window needed to make this jump. In this case, the acceptable window would be 0.0 to 0.2, and we can see the player's Y value completely leaps over this range of values. Now, if you remember earlier, I briefly mentioned and demonstrated how in other situations a player can make a jump with a head hitter landing. If we look at just a 3-block jump with a head hitter ceiling as shown earlier, we can see that the acceptable window of values is 0.0 to 0.2. If we check back on the tier list, we can see there's a height value of 0.1041, which of course fits into the required window. This means that according to the math, a player should be able to make this jump, and it checks out in the real world. As you can see, there is a point in which the player is at the height of 0.1041, and when this happens, they are able to get into the gap, making the jump. The same thing happens when adding the carpet I mentioned earlier, because even though the window is smaller, being 0.0625 to 0.2, the height of 0.1041 still fits into this range, and the player is still able to make the jump. So there's our answer. To put it in basic terms, and perhaps even oversimplify, Minecraft only updates 20 times per second, and this isn't precise enough to allow the player to fit into small gaps sometimes, even if it appears as though they should be able to at a glance. This tier system that Minecraft uses can cause some weird things like this to happen, but it can actually be utilized in some really cool ways in parkour as well. I've been seeing jumps like this becoming increasingly popular in high pixel housing, where if you hit this bar of sorts you won't make the jump, but if you clear it you will. Lots of people probably don't know why this is or how this works, but of course the reason is that when jumping from the starting block, there is a height positioning that allows a player to get into the gap at the landing, but if you land on the so-called bar, your future height values are reset and now based from this starting point, and this means that there is now no Y value allowing you to make it in between the blocks. Even if you brush the very edge of the bar, you are still technically landing on it, and so your height values will be based from this starting point. This jump here is relatively simple, but there are also harder, more complicated ones. I personally like this one where you have to jump over this slab and then actually land under it. If you hit the slab, you won't make it. In order to pull it off, you have to jump from the trapdoor, fully clear this top slab, and then essentially come backwards to make it into the landing. This jump is more fancy and certainly requires more skill, but the fundamentals of why it actually works are exactly the same. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one, folks.